Hi, everybody. I'm Daniel again, and I'm going to be talking in this lecture about more about React state management and about React router. So basically, React has like a bunch of helpful packages for you and helpful like functions for you that we haven't talked about yet in this class that will help you potentially make your projects a lot easier to code on the front end. So today we're going to be talking about just a few of those functionalities. Specifically, we'll talk about usecontext in React, and we'll learn more about React router and the React route tree. And our goal is to kind of expose like a few of these concepts to you, and maybe then you can like try to look towards like React documentation or whatever that may be to like help aid you even further in your projects, essentially. Yeah, so first we'll do a quick recap of what we've learned so far about React state management. So the main tool that we have for React state management so far is useState. And the way that this is generally set up is that first, at the top of our document, we need to import useState. Inside every single document, we create a state and a setState function using the useState hook. If we want to, we can call the setState function in order to change our state at any point. And then, in general, if we want to pass this state into a child component, then what we need to do is pass it in as a prop to our child component. And then our child component will be able to access it using the props that is passed into it. Here we pass in the name as a prop to child component, and then it's able to use name as a prop. Yeah. Cool. Okay, so let's imagine that we have this following React component tree where we have a state called name in our top level component called app, but then we use the same state all the way over here in our in the component G. Then what happens is we have to pass this name prop all the way down from app to F here, to potentially another component all the way down to G. So then we're kind of, every single step of the way, we're passing this name state as a prop through. This can get a little messy. And just to go through how it can get messy, we'll go through a little bit of an example of what we don't like, what maybe we wouldn't like. So this is my Google homepage. So we'll just look a little bit at the Google website, since it's a pretty simple example of a website. Okay, yeah. So so the top layer of any website usually is generally the web page. But if we were to code this in React, then we want to look at what the next level layers are beneath the web page. So maybe the next level layers, maybe a few of the things in the next level layer. This is probably not all of them. I wasn't even really looking at the search bar, but just a few of the examples are maybe the nav bar at the top, or the modal that pops up when you click on your profile icon. That might be another thing that is managed by the top level thing. Okay, yeah, so a few of the third layer things beneath that, all of the icons on the top, but just an example, we might need the nav bar icon with our profile picture. We might need our main icon area that says Hi Daniel here. And we also might need the other accounts section. That might be its own component within the modal, where we show all of our other accounts and allow ourselves to click on the other accounts and log into them, basically. Yeah, but the problem here is that all of these components might need to access our current user or change our current user. So if we're passing in if we have a user state and a set user setter function, then we kind of need to pass in this user and the set user function as props into a bunch of different components. So we're passing in props.user equals this username, and then props.setUser as another function. And then it just becomes really messy really quickly, because you can imagine if every single one of our components had like 7 props passed down into it, then your code would just look like this, like for every single time you wanted to write like like any component within in JSX basically. And generally we try to keep our code shorter when possible. So yeah, we don't want our code to just get messy like that. And basically, React has kind of a solution for this, which is called contexts. So contexts basically provide a way for the higher level components in our tree to communicate one state or potentially multiple states that it keeps track of to all of its subcomponents. So you can think of it as basically the subcomponents getting some context as to like what the higher level states are, without the higher level states having to, or without their higher level components having to pass down everything all the way through props. Yeah. So of course, we would probably have to see it in code to understand what was actually going on. So here's an example of code without usecontext. So as you can see in this code, we're making a user state, and we're initializing it as my name, and then we're passing the user state all the way down, and through a component, starting from component 1 all the way into component 2, and then into component 3, and then all the way into component 4. And we're passing it down through every single layer. And then finally in component 4, we use the state. So if we wanted to save ourselves the hassle of having to pass it all the way down, what we could instead do is, outside of our component, we create a context called usecontext. But we can call it whatever we want. This is a helpful name to tell us that this is keeping track of the user. Then inside component 1, we wrap the content of component 1 in what we call a provider. And every single context that we use using create context has this provider element. And this allows us to wrap everything. It's essentially just an element that does nothing on the visually, but it allows everything inside of it to see whatever it's providing. And here we're providing the value of user. So providers have a special keyword called value, and here we basically we give it a JSON object where the user is our user state. Yeah. So yeah, one thing that you'll notice here immediately is that component 2, we don't need to pass a user prop down into it. So in the previous code, we saw that we needed to pass a user prop into component 2. Here, we don't need to pass anything down into component 2. It'll already be able to know what user is as long as we use the context that it's wrapped around. And in order to use the context, what we'll do is we call the usecontext hook using user context, and then this will give us whatever's in the value thing. So this value thing is a JSON object with one parameter. We pull out that parameter using .user, and then now we can use it. Cool. Yeah, so an analogy that you can think of is that use state might be like a piece of information, which is our user and our set user. We can change that piece of information if we want to. But our use context is kind of like an empty book that you can write in that a lot of people have access to. In particular, everybody below you in your subtree can access that piece of information that you write into that book. Then the provider is kind of just like the library that you can check out the book from. And so if you wrap everything around this provider, then everything that can access your library can now check out this book and read what's inside of it. Yeah. Cool. I think, yeah, I'll stop. I'll stop for 30 seconds maybe, and you can take a look at this code. Make sure everything makes sense. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them right now or in the questions doc. Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Yeah, they can be in completely different files. So the only thing that matters here is that component 4 is within the tree of component 1. So everything that's like a subcomponent of component 1 or subcomponent of that, or so on and so forth, should be able to access anything that component 1 wraps in a provider. Yeah. 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 This is kind of like a dummy example. We'll see in the workshop that like you can even define the user context in a separate file from your like component as well. Yeah. Okay, cool. Moving on, we'll do like a little bit of a review kind of like how the component tree works and how use context fits into there. Yeah, so here's an example component tree with app as our top level. Let's say we define a context around A where we set our happiness to 6. Okay, so how many components will we know like what our happiness is? Maybe like give like a number of fingers on your hand, like 1 to 5. Like, what do we think? For how many components in this component tree? Okay. Cool. Yeah, I see like mostly 4s and 5s. Yeah, so if we include A, then the answer is 5. If we don't include A, then the answer is 4. But it's going to just be everything like A and below. The other side of the tree won't know what like our context is, or what's inside of our context. But it'll be A, C, D, G, and H. Yeah. Cool. And then maybe you have the question if we can have multiple contexts. Maybe something like this, where we have one use context that's wrapping everything underneath A, and then another one that's wrapping everything underneath C. Yeah, so we can definitely do something like this. There's nothing that like really prevents us from doing this. We just have to define 2 separate contexts and 2 separate providers, basically. Cool. Okay, any questions before moving on? We're going to move on to like a different topic entirely, basically. Okay, cool. So we're going to talk about React Router now. You've already seen React Router. We kind of talked about it a little bit in Workshop 2. But we're going to dive a little bit deeper into how React Router works, basically, and what, like, maybe you saw like a router or a router provider or something like that, and you were like, I don't know exactly what that is, but we'll kind of talk about what all of those are right now a little bit. So this is our code from Workshop 2. And we created this like router kind of thing, and then we've like rendered it into like the element. Anytime you want to use like any package, basically, but here we're using the React Router DOM package. You need to import what you want to use from it. Here we're just importing these packages or importing these functions that you don't really have to worry too much about. The router setup is in lines 17 through 24. And the first 2 lines generally won't ever change, so you don't have to really worry about them. And then we kind of create the route. We create the router based on what's like inside of this component like tree almost, and then finally we render the route into the document by using this getting element by ID of the root and then rendering the router provider into it. Yeah. So the funny thing here is this router provider is actually a context provider, and it like basically allows everything inside of our router provider to see anything about the URL that we want to. So like the URL is kind of like what is being provided in the context right now. So everything inside of our router provider can see the URL. So that's like a fun link to like what we just talked about with use context. So router provider is like using some kind of use context in the background to like kind of provide this information to all the subcomponents. Yeah. So let's zoom in a little closer on the router declaration. So this is the React route tree, and all our pages kind of exist here. And if we take this route tree, we can kind of transform it into like this tree as follows, where we kind of represent green elements using like green, and then error elements using red. So here we have the app and not found at the top, and then below it we have two components, feed and profile, that exist at the paths just slash and slash profile. If we continue with this example tree, router elements are always going to be rendered starting from the root. So even at localhost 5173/profile, we try to render profile, but in order to do that, we have to render app first. So what does that mean exactly? If we go into the app code, we see like this outlet thing in app.jsx when we return, and you might wonder like what the outlet is doing. You can essentially think of the outlet as like a placeholder like component. So when we render at /profile, this outlet will be replaced with like the profile component. So here, if we navigate to localhost 5173/profile, we'll see that the outlet that was previously here is just going to basically just essentially be replaced with the profile component. And then if we instead navigate to localhost 5173, then we'll be rendering at the slash thing. So we'll be rendering feed. So this outlet component is going to be replaced by feed instead. And so like you'll just see two different component trees at these two different routes essentially, because the outlet is acting as a placeholder. Cool. And the nice thing about this is that no matter where we navigate to, we always see the nav bar at the top. So that's like the important part here, which is like what makes like the outlet thing kind of nice, is that no matter like whether you're at profile or feed, you'll always see like the same nav bar at the top of your page. Yeah. Okay. Cool. If you want to pass props into outlets, it kind of works as you might expect from the parent side. So you pass in this myTest prop maybe, and then you feed it some parameter, and then from your feed, before you would maybe like if you weren't like in some router sort of tree, you would just access this prop using props.myTestProp. But it'll look a little bit different in React Router when you're passing through this like route component instead. So here, if you try to console log this, it won't work. Instead, what we do is this: we use the useOutletContext hook. We haven't seen this yet, but it might be useful in your project if you ever want to pass in like the same prop into all of like the subcomponents of your route tree. Essentially, we just replace props with the useOutletContext hook, and we're able to access the myTestProp parameter. Any questions here? I'll go back to this slide and pause for like 30 seconds. Yeah. Yeah, so whenever you want to use React hook, you generally want to import it in the file that you're using it in. So here, this is in feed.jsx, so we'd probably have to import useOutletContext at the top of feed.jsx in order to use the hook. Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. OK, moving on. Yeah, so now we'll talk about how the route tree kind of gets transformed into routes. A path to the route is essentially like the concatenation of all the relative routes along the route. So just as an example here, we have this like slightly more complex tree. If we navigate to localhost 5173/profile/Alice, we'll be rendering profile A, because we'll travel down from the root to /profile and then to /Alice. So we'll be rendering whatever happens when we try to like, we'll be rendering whatever the tree is with like just starting from profile A essentially. Yeah. Okay. And then we didn't talk about error elements yet, but error elements essentially catch when the paths don't match valid router paths. So here, as an example, localhost 5173/game. We'll be building a game in a later workshop, but so far we don't have one yet. So right now, if we try to navigate here, it'll just render the not found element, because starting from the root, it doesn't see anything. That's /game. Okay. So yeah, I have another question for all of you guys. So what would be rendered? Which one of the components would be the one that is rendered at localhost 5173/profile/Charlie? Would we see feed, not found, profile, or user not found? Maybe like, again, finger like one for feed, 2 for not found, 3 for profile, and 4 for user not found. What do we think? Cool. Yeah, I saw like basically all fours. Yeah, that's correct. We'll just go from, start from the root. We'll go to /profile, and then in /profile, we'll try to go to /Charlie, but it won't exist, so we'll see a user not found. Cool. If we were to write this tree out in code, it would look something like this, where we have this inner profile like tree where there's a /profile here, and it has an error element of user not found. And then beneath that, there's kind of two sub routes essentially. Yeah, this is the first example that we've seen of like a router tree of depth more than 1. But I'll kind of skip past this, and if you want to look more at it, you can come back to it later. But yeah, kind of this code is just going to map out into like this tree basically. Yeah. Okay. If we wanted, let's say I wanted like a lot of profiles, and I didn't want to hard code every single one as a React component. Like if a user creates a profile on my website, I'm not trying to like go into my source code and then add another file with another like component saying like profile C or something. So the dream scenario is that like /profile/Abby reads Abby from the URL and then passes it in as a parameter to like the profile component. And I only have one profile component that can kind of manage like manage whatever's inside of it using the props that's passed into it. Yeah, so the nice thing is that React Router has a functionality for this too. Of course it would. Here we have slightly different React router tree where the second route that we define has a :name tag at the end of it. So this :name part is a dynamic part of the path. And so what that means is this will be passed down as a parameter for the profile element to be able to access. So how do we get the name in profile.jsx? We just kind of add it at the top. Here, let's say this was our code before in profile.jsx where we didn't feed a name down. Now, if we were we use this useparams hook in order to kind of retrieve whatever's in the URL. So we just write const name equals useparams.name, and this .name part will just look for any :name part of our URL, and then it'll replace that with like whatever is passed in. And then here maybe we just like set the document title to like names profile page instead. So what would happen here is basically if we went to /profile/Abby, then when we access useparams, it'll have the name parameter as Abby because we've replaced our :name area with Abby, and it acts as a dynamic part of our route. Now, when we navigate to /profile/Abby, we'll see Abby's profile page as the title of our document instead. Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's kind of the last part of it, of my lecture. So are there any questions about this? I'll leave it up for like a bit as well. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so let's say you wanted to pass in more than one parameter. You could literally just do something like /:name and then /:, like ID or something, and then you can like just access it using useparams.name and useparams.id. Like you can just retrieve the two parameters from there essentially. Anything in your URL with a :: in front of it, you can retrieve, like just using useparams and then retrieving the name, the same thing that you put into the URL basically. Here we put :name, so we retrieve it using .name. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, so the last kind of comment that I wanted to make, I'm going to skip the wrap up, is that like there's a bunch of resources out there for you to be able to learn these things yourself. And React has a bunch of other useful hooks for you to use in your project. And you will probably find reading documentation pretty helpful for you to be able to incorporate like interesting functionalities into your front end. So here are just a few links for you to like maybe learn a little bit more about these things if you want. But yeah, if you ever like are wondering anything, you can always look towards documentation, ask people on Stack Overflow, like things like that. Yeah, there's a bunch of resources out there. So yeah, we'll be moving on, but before that, if you want to go to weblab.mit/feedback and give me some feedback on the lecture, yeah. But yeah, thank you guys.